In today's video I want to talk a little bit about the carrier and tell you why I hate this unit and why I believe it should be removed from competitive gameplay. One of the main things that I care about in StarCraft 2 unit interactions is the ability to change that the units interact with one another by microing or controlling your army better. Here we see 3 Zealots take on 6 Marines. The 3 Zealots will win and 2 Zealots will remain alive. This is if neither of these armies are controlled whatsoever. Now, if we have this same exact fight and the Marines are controlled even just a little bit okay, the fight will look very different. Obviously, if Maru would be controlling this fight would look very different. Probably he wouldn't even take a single hit. But even when someone like me does it, you can still survive with at least 3 Marines. Okay, so that's a very big difference from losing with 2 Zealots still alive to surviving with 3 Marines and none of the Zealots alive. The carrier is not quite like that, because the problem with the carrier is that this unit, it doesn't really require any micro, and also, even if it doesn't require any micro, you can't add anything either with better micro. So a gold player and a high grandmaster player will have approximately the exact same carrier micro. The only thing you can really do with carriers is shift click on your opponent's units. That is the only type of micro that really exists. And I guess you could say that you can let the interceptors come out earlier by either attacking some type of rocks or maybe attacking one of your own buildings or one of your own units. But really, there's not that much you can do with it. You can move in your release range a little bit. But the micro that you need to do with the carrier is almost 0 to make it reach its absolute full potential. And I really do believe that to be an issue if a unit is like that. A secondary issue that I have with the micro is how powerful carriers are at destroying your opponent's control of the units. Because of the interceptor, which has attack priority over the carriers, whenever you're moving a part of your army, these units will always attack the interceptors. If we take a look at this, you see that all the Hydras here are attacking the interceptors before they're going for the carriers or going for the High Templar. That means, well, with a Hydra force that is this large, you will get all the interceptors and then eventually are capable of killing all the carriers. But in the case where you don't have as many units that you can kill all the interceptors, this can be a real issue, and you might want to target down the carriers. Now, a cool way to do that, of course, would be to shift click. And that would be fine if Storm or Disruptors didn't exist. Because if you shift click and then you get stormed straight in the face a couple of times, all your Hydras are just going to straight up die. And that is a relatively big issue. Same is the case with Marines, Marauders, even Vikings to a certain extent. And this is really where I think the power of the carrier becomes so obvious to me. And that is that every single time a spell gets cast by the Protoss player, whether that's a Disruptor shot, whether that's a Templar, or if the Protoss moves into a position where the opposing player doesn't want to fight in, they can't have a shift click anymore on the carriers, and a simple A move won't do. While for the Protoss, a simple A move will always do. This means that full control and the full attention of the Protoss can be on controlling the spellcasters. While on the other hand, the player that, well, in this case only has pure Hydras, but imagine there was a couple of Vipers or Infestors with it as well. They need to take care of these spellcasters, but they also need to meticulously micro these Hydras to make sure that they're not just attacking interceptors. And I think this is the main issue, because it's just really difficult to properly split against this, and then with small parts of units attack carriers, while they can also be walking back, of course. They can be storming at all times. This tends to make the fights way easier for Protoss than it is for the opposing race, and makes microing properly almost impossible. Regular kiting movements don't really help unless you really care about killing interceptors. However, the problem with killing interceptors is that killing interceptors also doesn't do that much, because interceptors are just extremely cheap. At 15 minerals, they used to be 25 minerals a piece, and it actually fell pretty bad if you lost 8 interceptors. I mean, that's a lot of money. Nowadays, with 15 minerals and with the large mineral banks that you tend to gather, especially in PVZs, it just doesn't seem that impactful anymore. And it's honestly been a very long time since I've seen a Protoss player lose because he ran out of money to build interceptors. Often it is for a different reason. I also do want to note here, by the way, that I'm not necessarily saying that the carrier is overpowered or that I think Protoss late game is very imbalanced, because I don't actually believe that to be the case, especially at the higher levels. I just believe that wherever the carrier goes in a game, it tends to make the game worse. And I think that is the definition of a bad unit. I can't remember the last time I saw a carrier pop out in the game and I was like, ooh, wowzy. I'm so happy we're going to see some carriers again. I've been dying to see this unit in action. No, it's usually quite the opposite. Another thing that the carrier does very good is be better when there's more of them. It's a unit that really shines when there's a crap ton of stuff already. So carriers, 10 void rays, I don't know, 15 carriers. The bigger the ball, the better it is for the carrier, because they're sitting in the back and they're letting the interceptors do the work. If there's more to chew through before you can get to the carrier, that's generally a good thing for the carrier. And that's another issue. It just promotes dead ball play. And I think this is something we've seen recently a lot in, well, especially PvZ, but also even a little bit in PvT, where Protoss players just kind of camp on 3 or 4 bases and eventually do like a 50 pro push with 6-7 carriers. And it's like a huge army. There's no multitasking whatsoever. We're kind of skipping the entire mid-game phase, which is supposed to be, in my opinion, the most fun phase of the game very often. And yeah, it just doesn't feel very cool. Now, the final thing I really want to talk about is the inability for both players to leave a fight when the carrier is around. So for the Protoss player, whenever they commit to a fight, they commit to maybe 1.5 to 2 seconds of the carrier not doing anything before all interceptors are released. This takes quite a while and actually makes the carrier quite vulnerable, because the range for latching onto a unit is 8. This makes it really difficult to just kind of poke back and forth. It makes the fights last short and be in one go. Once you're engaged into a fight, you want to keep going, because you can just pull back for half a second and then can go back in again, which means that the position of the fight most of the time is where the first few shots are going to be shot. I don't think that is great for the Protoss side, because it makes it really difficult to kind of disengage. But it's also really difficult to disengage for the opponent. And the reason for that is quite simple. The initial, I think it's called the latch on range kind of, is 8. So if I want to attack this nexus, I need to get within 8 range. However, if my opponent would fly away with this nexus, or in this case, if I could just move back, I can get up to a range of 14. Which means there is still a pretty decent area in which, although the carrier is slow and my opponent's units are faster, there's still going to be a couple of losses, which is just really difficult to disengage in that case, especially if you have slightly slower units as well that are trying to run away. For Zerg, often it is kind of possible. Queens and Infestors tend to be the victims. With Terran, it can also be hard, you know, you lose 4 more Vikings on the retreat, or you lose 3 or 4 more Ghosts on the retreat, a couple of medevacs. And it just makes almost that every single fight that is being had is a one-time fight. And every single game, because you tend to get these massive death balls, just end with a single fight, or maybe if you're lucky and both players have a very large bank and a lot of static defense, we'll get a second huge fight with 140, 135 supply, while we're just skipping the entirety of the game, really. From the early game, where TOS tends to open with Void Rays against Zerg. They go into their carriers, and once they have their carriers, you don't see a fight until the game ends. And that is why I hate the carrier, and I believe it should be nerfed out of existence. Now, what do I mean with being nerfed out of existence? I mean, we should still make it that you can build the carrier, but we should make it so crap that it is not viable to just sit on your butt, get 12 carriers out, and win majority of your games with this below Master League. I don't think that's fun for anyone in the lower leagues, neither for the Protoss nor the Zerg players. Although I do know a lot of Protoss that like winning, so maybe my estimation of the Protosses and what entails fun is slightly wrong there. But yeah, I honestly think we could do a lot of things. We could make them more supply. We could increase the interceptor cost again. We could make the attack priority different, that interceptors aren't the natural attack priority. We could give interceptors less HP, less shield. I really do believe that the carrier is one of the main issues currently in StarCraft 2, and it's an issue that needs to be fixed. So if you work for Blizzard and you see this, perhaps, you know, change some of these numbers while the rest of the guys are asleep. And otherwise, yeah, I'm curious what you guys have to say in the comments about this as well, of course. If you believe that the carrier is indeed a bad influence on StarCraft 2, or if you really like using the carrier, in that case you might want to get checked. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening to this little rant. I hope you found it interesting or enjoyed it. I will not be doing this again in the future. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye. Oh, and don't bring this up in the IODIS comments. I know some of you guys are going to be real smart about that. That's not what IODIS is about. Bye-bye.